The cold wind whispered through the streets of Dreadford, biting at Daniel Reed's skin. A faint glow from neon signs bathed the narrow avenues in electric colors, but the sky remained oppressive, a thick layer of clouds choking out the moonlight. The detective walked with his coat drawn tightly around him, his collar up against the chill. His boots splashed quietly through puddles on the wet pavement. It was late, but the city was far from silent. Dark figures huddled in doorways, smoking, watching, living their desperate lives.
Dreadford always had this scent, decay, like the soul of the city is rotting. But now there's something more. Something new since I turned. The distinct smell of blood.
As he walked, he passed a closed pawn shop, its barred windows casting thin shadows across the sidewalk. For a moment, he took notice of his reflection in the glass. His face was pale, haunted and tired. The man he once was felt like a ghost, a distant memory from a life he could barely recall. A group of rowdy youngsters stumbled past him, laughing loudly, their voices jarring against the quiet hum of the night. One of them, a young girl with blonde hair, caught Daniel's eye. She stared a moment too long, taking interest in his mysterious persona. Daniel could feel the blood rushing beneath her skin. His hunger flared, sharp and sudden, like a knife twisting in his gut. He clenched his jaw and kept walking. His thirst pulled at him, clawing at his mind, but he forced it down. To live in this city is to ride over temptation's wings. Every corner, every alley hid something dangerous, something corrupt, something degenerate. It was the lifeblood of Dreadford pulsing through its veins. Dreadford did not have a heart, but a rotten apple pulsating with live maggots clawing their way to the center, away from the light. He could hear the whispers in the alleyways, the rasp of breath in the lungs of the homeless, lined up against crumbling walls. Ahead, a puddle shimmered in the dim light of a flickering street lamp. It looked like oil, catching the light in strange, iridescent hues. But Daniel knew better. Blood. Not much, just enough to catch the scent. It would have been unnoticed by most passers-by. Dreadford had seen worse, much worse, but Daniel found his feet drawing him closer. There was an irony to how fragile and without value life was here, how quickly it spilled onto the streets, ignored by the living.
How can life mean so little to this city?
Yet, to Daniel, the scent was irresistible, calling to something deep within him. His hunger stirred again, more insistent now. He would never have noticed the blood before, not as a mortal. But now everything is different. He knelt, touching it lightly with his fingers. It's fresh. Too fresh. He turned into a shadowed alley beside the puddle, and the scent grew stronger. It wasn't just the blood. He could hear it, the heartbeat of a man, fast and frantic. Daniel slipped deeper into the darkness, moving silently. Further down the alley, a homeless man slumped against the wall, bruised and bleeding, his eyes wild with fear, while his attacker, a thug with a knife, stood over him, kicking at his already broken body. The rush of anger Daniel felt was quick. He moved faster than the human eye could track, grabbing the man by the collar and yanking him away from his victim. The thug's arm swung wildly, plunging the knife into his stomach. He barely felt it. The blade pierced his flesh, but no pain followed, only a dim awareness of the wound. Daniel's hunger screamed. The monstrous Nephilim inside him awoke, its claws scraping against his control. The smell of blood, both from the wound and from the man before him, was intoxicating. It urged him to feed, to take what was his by right. The criminal struggled, his breath coming in terrified gasps, but Daniel was too strong.
"Leave, now!"
he said to the homeless man who stumbled his way out of the alley. Daniel's fangs elongated, and before he could stop himself, he sank them into the man's neck. Blood, hot and thick, rushed into his mouth, filling him with a surge of vitality. Each pulse of the man's heartbeat felt like a drum, growing slower, more sluggish as Daniel drank. The taste was overwhelming. It wasn't just blood, it was life. The man's memories, his fear, his pain, all flooding into Daniel's mind, feeding the hunger and making it harder to stop. The world outside narrowed. until all that existed was this moment, the connection between predator and prey. But Daniel fought it, wrestled with the darker urges that whispered to drain the man dry, to silence that heart forever. His mind flashed to the victim he just saved. With great effort, Daniel pulled back, his fangs retracting, the blood dripping from his lips. The criminal collapsed, unconscious, but alive. He looked down at the man, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. His stomach wound had already healed, his body mending itself without him even having to think about it.
Each night I walk these streets, the thirst mingles with the scent of fear. Every heartbeat echoes in my ears, a reminder of what I am. Justice, or the hunger. Which one will claim me first?
The night wrapped around him again, heavy with sin and unanswered questions. Daniel stepped out of the alley and into the street, his mind filled with thoughts of justice and hunger. Every heartbeat he heard, every breath he smelled, was a reminder of the darkness inside him. The door to Daniel's office creaked open. He flicked on the desk lamp, casting a pool of dim light over the space. Sighing, he slumped into the chair, its leather creaking beneath his weight. He leaned back, eyes closed, trying to push the memories away. It had all started in an office very much like this, the day Sarah O'Connor's parents walked in, their faces drawn with grief, asking him to find their daughter's killer. He hadn't known then what it would lead to. How could he have? How could he have guessed that tracking down a murderer would lead him straight into the dark heart of the vampire world, that it would lead him to Father Michael? Daniel's fists clenched at the memory. Father Michael, the one who had turned him, who had brought him into this existence. He thought about the past few months since his expulsion from the Midnight Fiends. They had been more than just a gang. They had been his family in this new world, until they weren't. A sharp shiver crawled up his spine, pulling him from his thoughts. He wasn't alone.
Finally, my son. I wasn't sure what time you'd return, but I decided to wait.
A voice called from the shadows. Daniel tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the stake hidden in his coat, but he didn't draw it. He knew that voice. There was no mistaking it. Father Michael stepped into the faint glow of the lamp. His eyes gleamed with a knowing calm, as if he had expected this moment.
What are you doing here?
Do I need a reason to visit my son?
Don't act like this is some family reunion.
How have you been?
I'm scraping by, picking up whatever minor cases I can find just to stay off the radar.
You are still hung up on the past, Daniel. Forget the fiends, they're small-minded. You were destined for something greater, something much bigger than that little gang of petty vampires.
I was fine where I was.
Michael chuckled softly, as if Daniel's frustrations were amusing.
You don't see it yet, do you? Being expelled from the fiends is the best thing that could have happened to you. You're free now, free to move beyond their petty politics. Let them squabble in the shadows while you rise above it.
I don't care about rising above anything. I'm just trying to survive. And you being here doesn't help.
On the contrary, I'm here to help you, Daniel, to make sure you're prepared for what's coming.
I'm doing just fine on my own. I've arranged a meeting with Bloody Mary at the Rapture. I'm going to settle my debt.
Good. Daniel, when you meet her...
Don't worry, I won't let her put any ideas in my head.
I'll see you soon, my son.
The older vampire turned and made his way to the door, and then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Daniel remained standing in the dimly lit office, the silence thickening around him once more. He stared out the window, his eyes tracing the skyline of Dreadford, the city lights flickering in the distance. The night had swallowed the city, and he could feel its weight pressing down on him. To Nosferatu, this city was like their domain, but also their prison, a place where monsters like him hid in plain sight, preying on the weak, feeding on the forgotten. Vampires were supposed to be in control, to wield their power with purpose. But Daniel felt like he was teetering on the edge, uncertain of his path, uncertain of where this life would take him, more lost than ever.
The night breathes secrets, secrets of horrors that should be long dead.
A soft knock on the door broke the quiet, pulling him from his reverie. His heart lifted just a little. He didn't need to guess who it was. He knew. A rare smile touched his lips. The door opened with a creak, and Pamela stepped inside. The coldness of the room seemed to melt away in her presence. Her bright eyes and teasing smile brought a brief respite from the storm in his mind.
Daniel, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's going on?
She closed the door behind her and stepped into the room. Daniel forced a grin, but it didn't reach his eyes.
I'm starting to feel like one.
Pamela's expression softened. Without a word, she sat down beside him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Pamela broke the silence with a soft chuckle, trying to lift the mood.
Come on, Daniel, you're going to have to spill it. I know that look. You're brooding over something.
Daniel's gaze dropped to the floor. He hadn't wanted to talk about it. He hadn't wanted to admit it. But with Pamela here, the words came tumbling out before he could stop them.
I drank human blood. It felt so wrong. But for a moment I caught myself justifying it.
Pamela's expression shifted, but she didn't recoil. She didn't look at him with disgust or judgment. Instead, she watched him with the same calm she always carried, as if what he'd said didn't surprise her. It didn't. She had always been more comfortable with her vampiric nature than he was.
You're not the first vampire to feel conflicted about it. But you can't be at war with yourself and endure.
But isn't it wrong? Drinking from people? Hurting them? Feeding on them like we're monsters?
He rose from his seat and started pacing around the room. She crossed the room and reached for his hand, pulling him gently toward her.
We don't have to be monsters, Daniel. Yes, we're vampires. Yes, we drink blood. But that doesn't mean we're evil. We can choose. We can decide how we live.
Her words were gentle but firm, spoken with the conviction of someone who had made peace with what she was. Daniel envied that about her, her ability to reconcile the darkness without losing herself in it.
Look at me. I feed when I need to, but I don't let it define me. We don't have to live in torment forever, Daniel. There's a balance. You just need to find yours.
Balance. Is that what this is? Drinking human blood and pretending we're not monsters?
If you keep fighting what you are, it will consume you. It's not about pretending. It's about accepting. Vampires don't have to be monsters, but we can't deny what we are.
He looked at her, a flicker of frustration in his eyes.
And if I don't want to drink human blood, is there another way?
Unless you're one of those Zen vampires from the old myths, the ones who supposedly slew their own Nephilim and transcended the thirst, then no, there isn't another way.
Zen vampires?
Fairy tales, legends that say some vampires found a way to live without the thirst. But even I don't believe them. We feed, Daniel. It's what we are.
Daniel sighed, rubbing his temples. The weight of everything was pressing down on him again. But Pamela was right, fighting it, hating himself for it. It wasn't helping. It was only dragging him deeper into a pit of guilt he might never escape. As the conversation faded, Daniel shifted the topic.
I've got to go to the Rapture tonight. I need to settle things with Bloody Mary.
And you think you should do that alone?
I don't want the Midnight Fiends involved. I'll handle it. I don't need to drag them into this.
All right, but I'm going with you. Bloody Mary can be dangerous.
As they prepared to leave, Pamela paused, turning to him with a curious look.
By the way, you still haven't told me why you brought DuPont to the library or why you did what you did. That's why the Fiends think you're a traitor, Daniel.
Daniel's face darkened, the memory flashing in his mind. He still didn't fully understand it himself.
I don't know. When I'm near DuPont, it's like I want to please him. At the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. I can't explain it.
Pamela frowned but said nothing, her eyes lingering on him as they stepped out into the night. The Rapture was alive, a chaotic blur of lights and sound that assaulted Daniel's senses as he and Pamela entered. The pulsing beat of the music seemed to vibrate through his bones, and the flashing red, blue, and green lights cast the revelers on the dance floor in ghostly hues. Mortals and vampires alike writhed together in rhythm, their eyes glazed with pleasure. Some of them, Daniel thought with a distant sense of unease, might be under vampire influence, perhaps even being fed on right now without even realizing it. The pair moved through the packed club until a tall vampire, with a demeanor that suggested they were expecting them, motioned for them to follow. They were led upstairs away from the thrum of the crowd into a quieter space on the second floor. Here the atmosphere shifted. Vampires and familiars sat at desks, wearing headphones, speaking into microphones. The room had the look of a radio station in full swing. As they passed, the host of a show leaned forward and spoke into the mic, his voice echoing around them.
Coming soon, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Red Hour, brought to you by our very own Bloody Mary, broadcasting live with truth they don't want you to hear.
Pamela raised an eyebrow at the mention of Bloody Mary's infamous show, but said nothing, merely giving Daniel a knowing look as they continued through the space. Eventually, they reached the door to Bloody Mary's office. It was half open, and her voice carried through, sharp and cutting, even when she was speaking in a conversational tone.
Jean-Luc, always the little puppet, licking the boots of the Dracul. I tried to bring him in on the revolution. I thought he might have some spine, some vision. Together we could corner the market. But no, he'd rather stay in the King's Court, cozying up to the Fang.
Your visitors are here.
Let them in.
Daniel and Pamela stepped inside to find Bloody Mary seated behind an imposing desk. The room was dimly lit, but the shadows couldn't hide the dangerous glint in her eyes. She exuded confidence, power, someone who thrived on chaos and rebellion.
Well, cousin. Nice of you to finally visit. I was starting to think I'd have to be more persuasive. I see you have brought company. How are you, Pamela?
Always a pleasure, Mary.
So, cousin, what brings you here tonight? I'm afraid I've only got about 20 minutes before I'm due for my broadcast.
I came to settle a debt. For your help with the not-so-discreet matters involving the Midnight Fiends recently.
Oh, the Midnight Fiends? Always stirring up something, aren't they? But yes, the debt. You wouldn't believe the kind of trouble the court has been giving me lately. But we can settle things, of course. There's just one thing you can do for me.
What is it?
I was going to send you after someone who's been a thorn in my side for a while, but something more urgent has come up. One of my familiars, one of the competent ones, has gone missing. Kelly. She disappeared yesterday and no one's seen or heard from her since. I want you to find her and bring her back to me.
Do you know where she was last seen?
No. That's what makes this so troublesome. She's usually reliable, and if she's gone dark, something's wrong. This is serious.
All right, I'll find her.
As he turned to leave, Bloody Mary called out, her voice laced with curiosity.
By the way, cousin, aren't you tired of being a tool? The King's Court? They gorge themselves on power while you do their dirty work. Haven't you ever thought of turning the system on its head?
Is that what the Red Hour is about? Tearing everything down?
The trick, dear cousin, is not to play by their rules at all. This city, this world, it's ripe for a change. You just need to stop being their pawn and start making your own moves. So this is what the Red Hour is about, a show for like-minded people.
Bloody Mary grinned, her voice dripping with conviction. Daniel glanced at Pamela, then back at Bloody Mary.
I'm here to settle a debt, that's it.
Suit yourself. Find Kelly and we'll be even.
With that, Daniel and Pamela turned and left the office. They descended back into the pulsating chaos of the rapture.
Has Bloody Mary ever tried to sell you on her revolution?
Oh, of course she has. She loves trying to recruit anyone she can. But I stay clear of politics. Too messy. That's something I learned well from Nayati.
Her voice trailed off, and a brief flicker of emotion crossed her face. A memory seemed to weigh heavy on her, and for a moment, they walked in silence. Daniel could feel the tension in the air between them. He gently brought her back to the present.
Are you ready to start this investigation?
Yeah, let's go. Where do we start?
We ask around here, the place she worked, about her and possible places where she was last seen.
Daniel and Pamela started speaking to staff and patrons about Kelly's whereabouts. It became clear that Kelly had left the club 2 nights ago, heading home after her shift, and had been expected to return yesterday. But she hadn't shown up, hadn't answered her phone, and no one had heard from her since. As they probed deeper, Daniel began to notice something strange. People didn't just respect Kelly, they seemed wary of her. Vampires and familiars alike spoke her name with a sort of nervous edge. At first, he thought it was respect for her competence, but as the conversations continued, Daniel sensed something darker. After he was satisfied that he got everything that he could from the rapture, they went to her apartment building. The streets outside were quiet, and as Daniel parked the car, a sense of foreboding settled over him. He didn't expect to find Kelly here, but he hoped her apartment would give them more clues. Pamela glanced up at the building, wrinkling her nose.
This place gives me the creeps.
Daniel nodded in agreement.
Let's see what we can find.
They slipped through a window to avoid drawing attention. Inside the apartment, it looked as though Kelly had left in a hurry. Clothes were strewn across a chair, and papers were scattered on a desk. Daniel and Pamela moved through the apartment carefully, searching for anything that might give them a lead. After a while, Daniel picked the living room phone and pressed redial. The phone rang twice before it was answered by a cold, formal female voice on the other end.
The Grand DuPont Hotel. How can I assist you?
Daniel froze. He quickly hung up.
Kelly called DuPont, but why?
Why would she call him? Isn't she Bloody Mary's familiar?
He began searching through Kelly's things again, trying to figure out where she might have gone after calling DuPont. Eventually, he found a note scribbled on a scrap of paper, a booking confirmation for a room at the Grand DuPont Hotel, DuPont's personal domain.
She's there, at the hotel.
Do you think she went to him willingly? DuPont is one of Bloody Mary's rivals.
I don't know. But it's not looking like she was forced. I'm going to guess she went on her own terms, and that makes this even more dangerous.
Daniel ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation.
If she's with DuPont, that's not good. With him involved, I don't know if I can be trusted. I won't.
Daniel, you can do it. I am going to be there with you. We can do it.
We need to go.
Daniel nodded and took some moments as he calmly collected himself. As they left the apartment and headed toward the hotel, Pamela glanced over at Daniel.
How are we going to get in?
Daniel's face was unreadable, but his voice carried a hint of dark humor.
Through the front door. I'm his lackey, right? I'll just walk in and request an audience with the leader of my house. I am a Nosferatu of House Strix, after all.
Pamela smirked, though the tension between them remained.
Let's hope it's that easy.
Daniel drove on, feeling the weight of the impending confrontation with DuPont settling over him like a shroud. As Daniel parked the car near the towering Grand DuPont Hotel, the air felt thick with tension. The hotel, all glittering lights and elegant architecture, loomed before them like a fortress. Daniel glanced at Pamela, who had been silent since they left Kelly's apartment.
Are you picking up her scent?
Pamela closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. After a moment, she nodded.
Yeah, it's faint but unmistakable. She's here. Follow me.
Together, they entered the hotel. Pamela led the way, weaving through the lavish hallways past bellboys and staff who were oblivious to the danger stalking these halls. Meanwhile, inside a luxurious suite that acted as DuPont's office, Kelly stood near the large windows with a conflicted expression as she listened intently to DuPont.
Ah, Mademoiselle Kelly, you are a woman of ambition. You don't let past attachments bind you. That is why you're different. And that's why you belong with me.
Kelly hesitated, her eyes flicking between DuPont and the view of the city outside. He could see her resolve wavering. DuPont continued, his voice hypnotic.
You've served Bloody Mary well, but why remain a mere familiar? I can make you one of us. You'd have power, immortality, everything you deserve.
Kelly's posture softened, her defenses crumbling.
Think about it. All you have to do is play your part. We'll stage your kidnapping, make it look like Bloody Mary's allies rescued you. You'll infiltrate her world for me, and when it's done, I'll give you the gift of eternity.
The silence hung heavy in the air as Kelly seemed to consider it. Suddenly, Daniel barged into the room. The guards posted outside barely had time to react before he was through. Pamela followed close behind, her eyes scanning the suite. DuPont straightened, his gaze locking onto Daniel with a mixture of surprise and curiosity.
Ah, Daniel, what a pleasant surprise.
I came to discuss my reward. I'm done being a nobody, a footnote. I want power. I want my place in the king's court.
Well, look at you. Finally, you found your voice. I must admit I'm impressed, Daniel. Ambition suits you.
He turned to his familiars and security and dismissed them with a casual wave, his smile never faltering.
It's fine, leave us. Daniel and I have business to discuss. Let's talk, shall we? I'll finish my business with Kelly, and then we can discuss your ambitions. But first, let's drink to the occasion. I have the perfect vintage for such a meeting.
DuPont stepped into an adjacent room to retrieve the wine, leaving Daniel and Pamela alone with Kelly. Daniel wasted no time. He rushed to Kelly's side, who looked mesmerized under DuPont's powerful charm.
Kelly, you're being played. If you don't get out now, you're dead. DuPont isn't going to turn you into one of us. He's using you. You'll be his puppet forever.
He whispered urgently, pouring as much of his own vampiric charm into his voice as he could muster, trying to shake her free from DuPont's hold. Kelly blinked, her eyes flickering with recognition as Daniel's influence began to break through. She looked shaken, but he could tell she was starting to wake up from DuPont's thrall.
What? Who are you?
You need to leave. Now. If you stay, you are done for. Get somewhere public with lots of people.
But before she could react, Dupont reappeared, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The pleasant mask was gone, replaced by cold fury.
Traitor.
His form blurred at an inhuman speed. He grabbed a spear mounted on the wall. His presence filled the room with a crushing wave of terror. Daniel felt an ancient power pressing into his mind, urging him to stop, to submit. His body faltered, his instincts screaming to kneel before Dupont's authority. Pamela's hand grabbed his arm, squeezing tightly.
Daniel, snap out of it!
She hissed. Her voice, combined with her presence, helped him resist the mental onslaught just enough to regain his focus. Dupont struck, spear flashing forward like lightning. Daniel barely dodged, moving with supernatural speed. The spearhead grazed his side, tearing his jacket. Pamela didn't hesitate, her strength letting her catch Dupont's arm mid-strike, the force of their clash sending a shockwave through the room. The Frenchman grinned as if amused, easily shrugging her off and shoving her into the wall. The plaster cracked under her impact, but she was on her feet in seconds. Daniel's danger sense flared again, and he dodged another spear thrust, rolling to the side and pulling out his stake. He knew it was useless against an elder like Dupont, but it was all he got. He feinted an attack, hoping to buy time for Kelly to run. Pamela moved next, grabbing a heavy brass candlestick from a table and hurling it at Dupont's head. He caught it mid-air, chuckling darkly.
You think these games will save you?
His eyes flashed, and Pamela faltered as a telepathic wave slammed into her mind. She stumbled, trying to shake off the mental attack, but Dupont's power was overwhelming. Daniel, taking advantage of the distraction, pulled Kelly toward the door.
Run!
He commanded, pushing her out of the room. Just as she made it into the hall, Dupont's spear flashed again. This time it found its mark, right through Kelly's heart. She gasped. Kelly's eyes widened in shock.
Mad, she wasn't even turned yet. Well, c'est la vie.
Daniel felt a rage like never before rise inside him. Kelly's death was senseless, and Dupont's casual cruelty only fueled his anger. But Pamela grabbed his arm, pulling him back.
We need to go, now.
They lunged toward the door, slamming it shut behind them as they bolted down the hallway, weaving between luxurious furniture and guests, all blissfully unaware of the carnage that erupted nearby. To their surprise, the security did not come after them. Dupont's laughter echoed, sinister and mocking.
Run, little rats, I'll catch you soon enough.
Daniel felt the pull of Dupont's blood connection, something deep inside begging him to turn around, to face the elder who held so much power over him. But Pamela grabbed his arm again, yanking him forward.
Not now, Daniel, not here.
They sprinted through the lobby, past towering art pieces and Dupont's grotesque life-size statue. The ornate surroundings blurred as they pushed toward the exit. As they burst through the hotel's grand entrance, the cold night air hit them like a slap to the face. They immediately returned to the Rapture. They were told Mary was underground and were directed to an elevator that descended into the underbelly of the nightclub. Something was wrong. Pamela stood beside him, her nostrils flaring as she caught the scent of blood, a thick, overwhelming odor that made her stiffen. As the doors slid open, Daniel entered into a nightmare. Rows of medical tables filled the room, each one occupied by humans strapped down, motionless, with tubes draining their blood into large, cold storage containers. The pale glow of overhead lights reflected off the crimson liquid as it pumped rhythmically through the tubes, a grotesque display of efficiency. Some of the people twitched in their restraints. Daniel's stomach turned. This was no ordinary blood bank. This was industrial, merciless, and utterly horrifying. He clenched his fists, his senses screaming in anger and disgust. He moved toward one of the tables, rage burning through his body as he yanked at the straps holding a man down.
We have to stop this. This is wrong.
Daniel, wait. Look around. They're not going to let you wreck this place.
Her warning came too late. Several vampires, some dressed in medical garb, appeared from the shadows, their eyes cold yet ready for violence.
If you interfere, be ready to face the consequences.
One of them hissed, his voice dripping with menace. Daniel's fury swelled, but before he could act, the doors to the facility opened, and Bloody Mary came in, her eyes gleaming with controlled power. She took in the scene with a raised brow, her expression unreadable.
What is going on here?
What the hell is this, Mary? You're keeping humans like livestock, draining them for blood? This is monstrous. You need to stop this now.
Do you think revolutions are fueled by ideals alone, Daniel? Where do you think the resources come from to fund our operations? To buy weapons, secure allies? It comes from the blood we sell.
So you're fine with this? With being a monster?
We're all monsters, Daniel. Don't fool yourself into thinking otherwise. This is how we survive, how we win.
The tension between them grew, palpable in the air. Daniel's mind raced as the reality of the vampire world crashed down on him. He wasn't just disillusioned, he was repulsed by the cruelty, cloaked in ambition. Bloody Mary, her patience thinning, crossed her arms and fixed him with a stare.
Enough. What happened with Kelly?
She's dead. DuPont killed her. He's probably coming after you next. You're running out of time and allies.
At the mention of Kelly, one of the humans strapped to a table stirred. Daniel froze as a young woman, pale and weak, slowly lifted her head, her eyes hazy but focused on him. For a brief, haunting moment, her gaze seemed to pierce through him. His stomach knotted and a wave of nausea swept over him.
We need to leave or I'll do something stupid.
Daniel muttered to Pamela, his voice barely steady. Pamela gave him a firm nod and together they turned away, moving quickly through the facility and toward the exit. Later in her private office, Bloody Mary sat at her desk, her fingers drumming lightly on the surface. She was deep in thought, contemplating the fallout of Daniel's visit and DuPont's looming presence. With a sigh, she pulled out a sleek business card from her desk drawer. Nicholas C. Graham. She dialed the number, her expression hardening as the line connected.
Mr. Graham, we need to resume our unfinished conversation.